I want to thank all of you for your interest in the Lord's Resistance Army and this topic that is very much underreported. The Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit, independent journalism initiative aimed at filling gaps in coverage of systemic global crises around the world at a time when so much of the commercial news media has lost the resources to cover these kinds of stories. So the Pulitzer Center partners with every major media outlet in the United States, in broadcast and print, to try to get these stories out. And we work with extraordinary journalists around the world who are willing and able to go out and do the dangerous work to tell these stories. I also tonight especially want to pay tribute to Human Rights Watch, our partner in this initiative on the LRA. This is the first time that we have collaborated with Human Rights Watch, which is the world's foremost organization investigating human rights abuses around the world. And they share our interest in raising the visibility of this issue and trying to engage the broadest American public in these issues.
I wanted to start this evening just with one story and then tell you a little bit about how the story of this man helped us at Human Rights Watch to start to uncover what was happening and the continued atrocities that the LRA were committing across huge swathes of Central Africa. It's a grandfather by the name of Papa Isidor. And he was a bit late that day. He was older and he was walking a bit more slowly. As he turned the corner down this narrow path to the place where the lunch was taking place, he noticed that strange men had come to attack. He didn't know who they were, but he saw that they were rounding up people at the church. And so he crouched in the bushes and he watched as things unfold. He saw as these attackers, and he didn't know who they were, separated the men and the girls and the children. One side, the boys and the men, the other side, the women and the girls. He saw as they marched the men and the boys off about 30 or 40 meters from the church. He didn't know what they were doing, so he crawled further through the bushes to watch. He saw as they massacred them, one by crushing their skulls with heavy wooden sticks. He saw his grandchildren killed. He saw his sons killed. He saw his friends and neighbors killed. And he went looking for his wife. He eventually found her body, badly decomposed 2 days later. And he then began the process of burying the dead. One 79-year-old man began the process of burying over 85 people.
What I'd like to do is briefly take you through some of the small experiences. What the LRA like to do quite regularly is to send messages not just to the local villages where their abductees come from, but also to the local military. So they actually cut off with machete her lips and her ears and sent her back into the town as a message to the local military that the LRA were close by. This is not an isolated event. This happens regularly. This has happened in northern Congo. This has happened in southern Sudan. This has happened in Congo, where this lady comes from. This young man spent many months in the Lord's Resistance Army. He was forced to be a soldier. He was forced to kill. He was forced to carry. He was forced to be an agriculturalist and nurture crops for the Lord's Resistance Army. And so what they're trying to do is to build a small village every time they come to abduct, every time they take young children, every time they take older adults. It's to maybe feed their need for cultivation, feed their need for soldiers, and unfortunately feed their need for sexual violence, because a lot of the times they're abducting young girls and forcing them to be wives. This girl, along with Olivier, probably some of the most courageous people I've met. Her name is Valentine. She was abducted when she was 13 years old and was raped by Joseph Kony himself. She was his wife. She was forced to be his wife at the age of 13. And she lived in one of the small villages where Joseph Kony used to come. All of these commanders have several villages or camps that they come to. So they don't just have one wife, but they have several wives in each of these camps. And Valentine was one of those. She was also a cook. She used to cook for Joseph Kony. And one evening she burnt his rice. And she was accused by the other wives of trying to poison Joseph Kony, of being a witch. And the following day she was going to be tried by Joseph Kony and most probably sentenced to death and killed by the other soldiers within the LRA. And so during an attack on a local village, she took that opportunity to escape into the bush.
Almost exactly 1 year ago today, we heard rumors that there was an attack by the LRA in the Makombo area of northern Congo. There was no clear information about what happened, when exactly the attack was. They said sometime before Christmas 2009, but they didn't know. No one knew exactly which villages, how many people were killed or abducted. So what we did is we went to the region and we got on motorcycles with local human rights activists and traveled to the area. And what we discovered was that in a series of well-coordinated, planned attacks, a group of just 20 LRA combatants massacred over 345 civilians and abducted another 250 civilians, mostly children aged 10 to 15.
Our goal was to shed some light on a story that's received scant attention over the last quarter of a century. This is not a new phenomenon. I saw how difficult it was to convince editors to put aside the resources to allow this kind of reporting. And what we were able to do was not something that I could have done with Reuters. I never would have had the budget to take even one of the chartered flights that we took. In these areas, we found a population that was completely unprotected. In Congo, with the world's largest UN peacekeeping mission, 18,000 peacekeepers on the ground, there are less than 1,000 in areas where the LRA is operating. These people live off their wits. We were in a village where a local chief sent hunters out into the bush to get an idea of where the rebels were, to know when they would attack, so he could at least inform the Congolese army so that they might be prepared when the rebels did arrive. Unfortunately, those national armies in Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo are more likely to loot, to rape their own people than to stand up and fight for them. We saw the Ugandan army, the UPDF, which is the linchpin of the American strategy against Joseph Kony and the LRA, the force that will likely, under the new strategy, continue to be so. We found an army that was ineffective. We found an army that was a force that was inadequate, and a force that had a willingness to fight that was at the very least questionable. Those we spoke to in these areas where they have no possibility of calling out for help, there are no phones, there is no real network to get a message out. Human Rights Watch, who stays on this every day, often they find out about attacks weeks, sometimes months later. They had one message for us, and they are aware of the law that was passed. They're aware that there's a strategy, and they had one message, and that was help us, come and help us. And that's what we're trying to do through this work.